Hi everybody. In this video I want to cover another email question that I've received a lot, saying that people have found out that I'm Australian. And that question simply is, what is IT like in Australia? Now, I can only really answer this question for Melbourne for the most part. However, I did spend about 5 or 6 months in Sydney, so I can tell you this. In Melbourne, IT is booming. Okay, there are jobs ongoing all the time in IT in Melbourne, but from what I've seen, and this is coming from a guy who's in the .NET space, so I'm not in any Android space or iOS space or anything like that. Only from a .NET space I can tell you this. Sitecore is the number one thing that people want in Melbourne. I mean, I've never seen such a demand for a technology in my life in one city as I have for Sitecore. Now, I know Sitecore is used across the world as well, and I know it's in other cities, but I'm also aware that in other cities they go outside the spectrum of CMS design and they work on things like mobile apps and things like that. We do have companies that are dedicated to mobile development, obviously, but for the most part, we have a lot of digital agencies and a lot of corporations that focus a lot on their content, and especially around searching content and publishing it and making it easy for the user to basically produce it. So, that being said, Sitecore is number one on the hot list, and it's always the first one I'm asked about when I get a recruiter on the phone. Probably I would say of the 8 or 10 calls that I get, which I get calls quite regularly because of my .NET background, 8 of them would be about Sitecore. At least 8, if not 9. All of the others might be around things like Angular JS, some front end stuff, because the thing with me is I'm actually a full stack dev, so I actually work both front and back. A lot of devs out there don't work front and back, they just work back or they work front. I try to do both, and I always have tried to achieve doing both. And for so far at this point in my career, I'm very successful at both. So I do get some odd end front end dev stuff, but for the most part, Sitecore is the major thing. So plenty of jobs out there. I can honestly tell you, you come to this country, you're going to be plenty of jobs. However, if you're looking for something that's not Sitecore, the job count comes down very quickly. So it goes down from, maybe potentially there being, 200 daily jobs in IT out there to potentially only about 15, 20. And obviously, Sitecore is one of those things that everybody wants it, but not everybody has it. So it becomes a big fight between the recruiters to try and find excellent .NET devs who can basically fake their way through Sitecore. Now, I've been on the end of this stick before. I've gone in for a job, actually just recently, as of a few months back, where I was put up for a Sitecore role, and surprisingly enough, I got the job. But I don't have a lot of Sitecore experience personally. I have a little bit. My focus is more around cloud technologies like Azure and AWS, and just basic .NET development in terms of making web apps and APIs and microservices and those kinds of things, as well as building front-end technologies such as Angular 2, which is coming out now, and Bootstrap and HTML, CSS, that kind of stuff. I try to stick in that area, as well as eventually I want to push my way out into mobile applications such as iOS and Android, which I have looked at this point. However, every time I try to think of an app idea, I can't seem to find one that will take me only a little bit of time. It's always a big idea I come up with. Anyway, off the side of that, in Melbourne, from what I know, Sitecore is key if you're going to go in the .NET space. Not sure about things like Java or PHP or any of those kind of things, but to be honest with you, when I look at jobs online, even though I might do phrases for .NET, when I do look at other areas of IT, there's not a lot out there. I would say most of what I've seen in Melbourne so far is .NET development. So you'll have your PHP guys, and you'll have some iOS guys with Objective-C for the most part, not Swift. Objective-C, obviously, Swift has just come out the last couple of years. So, even though I know Swift at this stage, I've spent time looking at, Swift in iOS, and obviously a little bit of Java. I've had in my background for many years. I mean, C# and Java are very similar by nature. So if you know C#, it's pretty easy to pick up Java and vice versa. But for the most part, I see .NET, and definitely it's Sitecore that runs the major one. The second one is cloud, so if you have any skills in Microsoft Azure or AWS, that is key. I would say that you have a second tier chance. Anything beyond that, it becomes more of are you looking for full-time or contract? At this point, am going primarily for contracts, and the reason for that is because I am trying to establish my own company. As you can see here, I'm working on a course right now in my spare time when I'm not contracting, which I am currently contracting a company called CrownBet. And I'm dedicated to them until February of next year. But after that, I'll be spending more time in my own development. And on the side, if you haven't already known, I'm also focusing on HTML5 and CSS3 course. But outside of that, those things like just basic .NET stuff, it comes down to after that, you're probably looking at a full-time job, so the full-time gigs are they're more lenient. They'll say, just .NET development or MVC, MVC, web forms, sometimes WPF, depending on the company. Xamarin is ideal, that kind of thing. Or if you're really keen, iOS, there's a lot of iOS jobs out there, and Android as well, or both. A lot of people are starting to learn both, which as a person who's both looked at iOS and Android recently, I would say definitely learn both. I would not stick myself just to one craft, especially when you have got companies jumping down your throat saying, hey, look, we need to support both Android and iOS. Make yourself valuable by doing both. Don't just stick to one. Anyway, that's just a bit of advice on the side, but outside of that, there is not much out there in terms of dev work other than maintenance work, to be honest with you. If you're a maintenance guy, you don't mind going in and fixing SQL store procedures or just basic .NET or PHP code or just basic stuff. There might be one or two jobs that are currently running, on a daily basis that require someone to do that kind of maintenance work. Maybe more. Gonna be honest, I always try and look for jobs that I find appealing. But definitely in terms of the number of jobs out there is plenty in Melbourne. There is absolutely plenty. Now, when I was in Sydney, the market was a little bit more competitive. Obviously, they're a richer city. They got more money. So if you have a high skill set, you can do pretty well up there. However, the cost of living up there is bigger too, so you can expect that even if you get a high wage, you're probably going to have to pay a lot of money to live there. So ideally, I think Melbourne is a great city to learn IT. I think it's pretty dynamic here. It's comfortable, it's relaxing. The rent is getting higher, but it's still not the ridiculous nature of a Sydney or anything like that, or even, I've heard in some places in Los Angeles and New York, it's just absolutely ridiculous. Don't even bother trying, At least in Melbourne, we still have, a little bit of flexibility to move around if we feel comfortable. We're not locked down to an expensive place, that kind of thing. But yeah, anyone who wants to come to Melbourne, definitely got plenty of work here for you. But yeah, no, it's an interesting field in Australia, IT, for sure. It's one of those things that I would encourage anyone to code, to be honest with you. I think that everybody should at least have some knowledge of how to write a line of code or just how to write some algorithms, and because one day I feel like IT is going to be the biggest thing that's out there, and if it's not already the biggest thing that's out there. But I think a lot of people are going to need control of things in their life, and it's going to be done by code. So those are my thoughts about the IT space here in Australia. As I said, I can only speak mostly for Melbourne, but I can tell you now, Sydney is a very competitive market. Didn't seem to have as much Sitecore there on demand, but there were a few. But I think in Sydney there was more leniency for PHP developers. Ruby on Rails, another one that's starting to come into the space. And I mean, yeah, code's code, man, and you can learn it anywhere. But in Melbourne, definitely, I think the big boom is Sitecore. That's just from my experience of talking to recruiters and talking to people in the IT space. So yeah, so I hope that answers your question, and thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you guys next time.